I open this public hearing of the Joint Standing Committee on Treaties for its inquiry into the agreements between the Government of Australia and the Government of the Republic of Colombia relating to air services, the agreement between Australia and the Government of the Republic of Peru relating to air services, and the agreement between the Government of Australia and the United Saudi Arabia relating to air services. I begin this hearing by acknowledging the traditional custodians in the land in which we meet today, pay my respects to elders both past and present. I also extend that respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people joining us today. In accordance with the Committee's resolution of July 31st, 2025, this hearing will be broadcast and proof and official transcripts of this proceedings will be published on the Parliament's website. I remind members of the media of the need for fair and accurate reporting of the proceedings of this committee. I now call our witnesses for this hearing today. Representative of Air Services and the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade to give evidence today. For the Hansard record, would you please each state your full name and the capacity in which you are appearing before the committee?
Thank you, Chair. Jim Wolfe, Assistant Secretary, National Aviation of the Department of Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development, Communications, Sport and the Arts.
Rebecca Uvardi, I'm the Director of International Policy and Regulation from the Department of Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development, Communications and the Arts.
I am Diana Nelson, Acting Assistant Secretary, APEC and Latin America Branch, Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade.
I'm Anuska Charles. I'm the Director of the Gulf State Section in the Middle East Branch, Middle East and Africa Division, Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade.
Alexandra Perry, Treaties Manager from Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade.
Thank you. Although the committee does not require you to give evidence under oath, this hearing is a legal proceeding of the Parliament and therefore has the same standings as proceedings of the respective houses. The giving of false or misleading evidence is a serious matter and may be regarded as contempt of Parliament. The evidence given today will be recorded in Hansard and attracts parliamentary privilege. It is the responsibility of witnesses to accurately record questions on notice that are taken. Would you like to make an opening statement before we proceed to discussion?
Yes, Chair, if I would may, just to make a brief opening statement. The Department appreciates the opportunity to present to the Committee the three proposed air services agreements with Colombia, Peru and Saudi Arabia. Air service agreements are negotiated to permit and facilitate the operation and development of international air services between countries under the 1944 Chicago Convention, which provides an overarching global civil aviation framework. These agreements facilitate international flights and provide market access for international airlines seeking to operate between countries. Various aspects of the proposed agreements with Colombia, Peru and Saudi Arabia will be implemented through an existing framework of legislation, which includes the Air Navigation Act 1920, the Civil Aviation Act 1988, the Australian Transport Security Act 2004, the Customs Act 1901 and the International Air Services Commission Act 1992. No financial costs to the Australian Government are anticipated in the implementation of these agreements, nor are there any financial implications for state or territory governments. In negotiating and finalising these agreements with these three countries, the Department of Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development, Communications, Sport and the Arts engaged in comprehensive stakeholder consultations, including with government agencies, the states and territories, and with industry, including airports and Australia's international airlines. The Department maintains a model air services agreement text, which is updated from time to time to reflect developments in our aviation policies, international trends, and a template air services agreement, which is produced by the International Civil Aviation Organisation. The proposed air service agreements with Colombia, Peru and Saudi Arabia closely reflect the Australian model text. Any differences from that text were the result of amendments agreed during negotiations with these three countries. As with all air service agreements, these agreements oblige the Australian Government and the relevant foreign government to allow designated airlines of each country to operate services between the two countries. Services are operated in accordance with the terms settled between aeronautical authorities and are subject to compliance with applicable laws, including safety, aviation security, customs, quarantine and competition law. The proposed agreements with Colombia, Peru and Saudi Arabia will establish for the first time a treaty-level air service agreement between Australia and each of these countries. In conjunction with the commercial entitlements, these will also allow international airlines of Australia and those countries to develop and operate international services between our countries should they choose to do so. The Department acknowledges the considerable delay in tabling these 3 agreements in Parliament and bring them to consideration for JSCOT. 2 of the proposed agreements, Peru and Saudi Arabia, were signed in 2017, while the proposed agreement with Colombia was signed in 2019. These delays have not affected the operational application of proposed arrangements with Peru and Saudi Arabia, as they have been applied on an administrative non-legally binding basis under the auspices of Memorandum of Understanding. The MOU with Peru was signed in 2013, while the MOU with Saudi Arabia was signed in 2011. This means that both of these proposed agreements are already being observed by the relevant aeronautical authorities pending entry into force, which has allowed designated airlines to use these opportunities under these agreements since the MOUs were signed, should they have wished to do so. The proposed agreement with Colombia is slightly different due to domestic requirements, and Colombia has not been applied on an administrative non-legally binding basis. The proposed agreement is still supported by an MOU which was signed by aeronautical authorities of Australia and Colombia in 2017. Because the proposed agreement with Colombia has not been applied on an administrative basis, designated airlines of Australia and Colombia have not yet had the opportunity to utilise the opportunities until it comes into force. In accordance with both Australian and accepted international practices, the MOUs settle more detailed commercial entitlements that determine the scopes of airlines' obligations under the air services agreements. These MOUs are by custom confidential between aeronautical authorities and are not distributed publicly. We have provided confidential copies of the MOUs with Colombia, Peru and Saudi Arabia to the Committee to support your consideration of these arrangements. The delay in tabling these agreements is in part due to the COVID pandemic, when for several years all countries, including Australia, stopped air services negotiations and treaty processes and focused on international travel regulatory restrictions. Since then, the Department has supported Australia's post-COVID economic recovery by expanding Australia's air services agreements, which has helped facilitate the recovery of international tourism and trade. We've also developed a program to progress the backlog of air service agreements requiring domestic treaty processes, including those that will be provided over the next few years for the Committee's consideration. We are also, of course, dependent on other countries' completion of their formal treaty processes, and we note in this regard that both Peru and Saudi Arabia have notified us that they have proceeded with domestic processes that will allow these agreements to enter into force. We will be happy to take any questions the Committee may have on the proposed agreements with Colombia, Peru and Saudi Arabia. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I did have a few questions about timing, so just sort of picking up on that last part of your opening statement. So just to help us clarify, so the MOUs go back to 2011, 2013, so that's like over a decade ago, in fact a bit longer. So then the process was to negotiate a treaties, one signed in 17 and one signed in 19, but the delay to refer those 2 to JSCOT, you're saying is because of the pandemic disrupting global travel?
Yes, Chair, that's a significant part of it, but we also, since COVID, our focus has been on the negotiation of more agreements with other countries to help Australia's economic recovery.
When you say more agreements, more air services agreements, like how many are we talking about?
11.
And are they all identical? Is that the goal to see them be similar, or are they all?
They're very similar, yes.
Right. Okay. And so we should expect, so this is 3, we should expect another 8 coming our way?
Yes. I think we've got, there's a couple in particular that I should mention that are coming up. Just get those names for you. We've got You get the names?
Yeah, so we
Sorry,
have-
Rebecca.
We have Nauru, Kiribati, and one other one coming through shortly. So we're developing up the NIAs for them, and then Oman and the Seychelles after that.
So am I right in suggesting that there's now a bit of a model kind of treaty template that we're taking to countries to say this is what we now want to adopt as a new best practice with Australia?
Yeah, that's correct, yeah.
Right. Okay. So Peru, when did Peru and Saudi Arabia enter into there? So you said that they had gone through their internal processes and it's now in force. When did they do that?
I'll check that date for you. It's fairly recently, and when we say it's in force, from their perspective, the MOU's been in force for many years. This is just the formalisation of the treaty arrangement.
And can you give us any insight into Colombia and what their internal processes are like, or whether they're waiting for us to move first?
I think their process links the domestic side of it with the treaty side of it, so that process is a little bit slower. They haven't indicated to us recently that they are ready to sign, but we will certainly, once we have informed them that we've completed our process, we'll be hoping that they would follow shortly thereafter.
Is that related to the kind of like current DFAT smart traveller categorisation of Colombia as a level 2 country? Like, how does that then interact with this agreement? Like, exercise high degree of caution when travelling to Colombia. How does the smart traveller intersect with this agreement?
Smart traveller, my DPAC colleagues, it doesn't affect the impact on these particular arrangements. That's obviously advice provided for those travelling to that country, but doesn't impact on the treaty arrangement.
Right. Okay. You've got some questions. Yep. I'll go to our Deputy Chair next.
I do. Thank you all for being here. Super curious to know what this means in terms of the economic dividend for the country, and in particular trade routes, people routes. We all know that direct flights contribute massively to both investment but also direct trade and high quality goods from Australia. However, I don't think I've seen any Peruvian or Saudi or other planes here. Presumably it's all code share, but does this mean there's going to be more direct flights in both directions?
At the end of the day, it is a commercial decision by the airlines as to whether they take up these particular opportunities. Certainly, I think we have heard suggestions that Saudi Arabian Airlines are considering operating to Australia, so that would be a positive. Of course, there's significant trade between the two countries.
With their metal? Yes, it'll be their metal that's flying. It'll be their metal that's flying, so branded Saudi Arabian Airlines. Good.
Yep. So far, we haven't heard anything directly from Peru or Colombia in terms of potential services, but this does provide the opportunity, and as you mentioned, of course, there is the opportunity to co-chair as well.
In terms of goods that we think would benefit from direct flights, do we know yet what they would be? In terms of freight between the countries, there's obviously, or trade I should say, the number one trade is tourism and the other one is students. A significant number of students travel between the two countries. But often the bellies of the flights are filled with meat and other good things from Australia.
Definitely with the Saudi Arabia's definitely got a strong meat trade.
But we don't know what else might be in the south of the plains.
Add to that, Deputy Chair, for Colombia and Peru. So for Colombia in particular, we have trade in cut flowers, which is obviously a product that needs to travel quickly. We've also got beef trade, Australian beef into Peru. So there's a number of products in both bilateral relationships that would benefit from additional options. Just in terms of connectivity to the region, at the moment connectivity to the Latin American region is through Santiago, Chile, with flights from Melbourne and Australia. Obviously, more connectivity to the region is going to assist us to build greater people-to-people links. Mr. Wolf's already mentioned education and tourism. but also to assist us to build up those bilateral trading relationships.
If I may, Deputy Chair, Saudi Arabia is a substantial market for beef, sheep meat, barley, wheat, dairy products, cosmetics, pharmaceuticals, vehicle parts, accessories and vegetables. There's also very strong people-to-people links, as has been mentioned. A significant cohort of Saudi students in Australia, quite a number of Australians working in Saudi Arabia, and of course Australian Muslims undertaking pilgrimages in Saudi Arabia too.
And remind me, we don't yet have an FTA with the Gulf states, is that right?
We have entered into force our first trade deal with the UAE.
But nothing with the Gulf states per se? So Saudi...
nothing with the GCC yet, yeah.
Yeah, okay. And in terms of all those items you've mentioned, they go back and forth, roughly half, so anything that's fresh food, cosmetics, do they go in the Bowes and Plains too?
I would have to take that on notice.
Okay, that's all right, just curious to know. That's all, I think, from me. Thanks.
Okay, a member for Sturt.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here this morning. I just have one question. I'm curious about how you determine passenger capacity. So I think in the range of agreements we were provided with, there is a range of options. So 7 flights a week to some parts of Australia, 4 flights a week, to other parts, depending on which country you were looking at. How do you determine that, and what impact does that have on other airlines servicing sort of other parts of the world, and the impact on Australian travellers?
Yeah, thank you. We basically we consult with stakeholders about their interest in particular markets. That's a key consideration. We do have a general standard starting position that we do like at least a daily service. So 7 services a week is sort of our baseline. Some of the agreements are a bit older, and I think you can see we'll be looking to update those to increase the amount of capacity that's available under the agreements. Other agreements have a variation depending on the nature of the traffic. The overarching policy is capacity ahead of demand. We'd like to keep that ahead of demand, and we've also, as indicated in the aviation white paper from the government, that we will look at the potential for open capacity agreements where that's in our national interest and where we can agree that with our bilateral partners.
Okay, thank you.
Member for Bowman.
Thank you, Chair. My question is sort of, I suppose, a similar line there. I'm intrigued as to what the priority process is for the department in terms of striking these new agreements. How are you determining, you mentioned the 11 others that are being worked on, how are you determining which nations, are going to be the next cabs off the rank? Is it more about how proactive their governments are in terms of dealing with us, or is it are you being led by industry consultation as to what potential markets might be emerging?
Yeah, it's certainly driven in part by our stakeholder consultation, both within government, with our colleagues obviously in DFAT and other departments, the states, our tourism bodies, and certainly our airlines and other industry players as to what they are seeing. It's also, yes, it's done obviously in consultation with the other countries themselves, and some of them are clearly more keen to pursue more open capacity agreements. Others are a little bit more conservative, and at this point in time maybe not open for it. So it's a consultative process, and certainly the other thing we look at is trends. For example, in particular markets, if the current capacity looks like it's starting to become constrained, and a good feature of that is load factors on particular flights. If we're getting consistently 85–90% loads on a particular route, that gives us a bit of a signal that might be time to try and get some more capacity.
Thanks, Chair.
Great. Okay, member for Maribyrnong.
Thanks very much, Chair. I just had a question with respect to the agreement with Saudi Arabia. Article 4 requires compliance with the other party's laws while operating in its territory. What are the most significant regulatory differences between Australian carriers should expect in Saudi Arabia, particularly around labour, gender or workplace conditions?
Yes, our agreements do require the national laws of each country to apply in each particular circumstance. In relation to airlines, they are, of course, our airlines are based in Australia, so they're subject to our requirements.
Okay.
But that I should be cautioned that obviously if Saudi Airlines were to fly to Australia, they would be subject to our safety and security requirements. That's part of the agreement.
Can I ask, as a follow-up, how will the government support Australian airlines to operate safely and consistently with Saudi regulations?
Yeah, certainly. Australian Airlines the aircraft is registered in Australia,
Sure.
So they actually have to comply with our laws and our requirements.
Yeah. Excellent. All right, no further questions. Thank you.
Just a clarification, I think the member from Amaravati was talking about an Australian plane that lands in Saudi Arabia. What support do we provide to them if there was something to happen that would get a tick from our laws but comes into conflict with Saudi Arabia?
Yeah, we can call for consultations between the two parties should we have concerns about what our airlines are being asked to comply with in Saudi Arabia.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for the clarification.
Okay, I think that brings us to the end of the questions today. Thank you for your attendance here today. You'll be sent a copy of the transcript of your evidence and will have the opportunity to request corrections to transcript errors. If you've been asked to provide any additional information, I think there was only one about some of the goods that travel in planes, the cargo. If you could please forward to the Secretariat by close of business, Friday the 31st of October 2025. And I declare this public hearing closed.